Hey everybody, it's Tim at the University of Vinyl. This is going to be episode number 3 of my continuing series called Best in Class. I'm taking a look at some of my favorite albums that basically, if you look at all of the best of list, all of these albums are going to appear on all those lists that we love to check out. So I'm doing my own series, and make sure you check out the playlist. I do have a playlist that I've created for this series called Best in Class. And so far I've covered Dylan's Blonde on Blonde, and then also U2's Achtung Baby. We're going to wind the clock back up to 1977, 1978, and talk about the debut album from Van Halen, the fantastic band from the San Fernando Valley outside of Los Angeles. Famously, the Van Halen brothers and David Lee Roth grew up in Pasadena. Michael Anthony was from the area as well. I don't know the full background on Anthony, where he grew up. He was actually, I think, the second bass player in the band. Famously, they were going under the name of Mammoth for a while. David Lee Roth had the idea to change the name of the band to Van Halen. In the mid-70s, they were playing backyard high school parties, county fairs, and eventually ended up on the Hollywood Strip. They were regulars at the very famous Starwood, also the Rainbow, and eventually even the Whiskey A Go-Go. In 1976, Gene Simmons of Kiss saw the band live. I think it was at the Whiskey A Go-Go, or maybe it was at the Starwood. He basically flew the band to New York, signed an agreement with them, put them up in New York. They recorded the famous demos that were done at Electric Ladyland in New York. Simmons talked to his management, turned the tapes over to Kiss's management, and they were not as enthused as Gene Simmons was with the material. So it kind of sat on the shelf for a while. In 1977, Ted Templeman, a producer with Warner Brothers, did a string of albums with the Doobie Brothers. He got Mo Austin to come out on the town one night to the Starwood to check out Van Halen. And after that show, they decided to sign Van Halen to Warner Brothers. The rest is history. They went into the studio with Ted Templeman producing. Lead engineer was the kind of notorious and legendary Don Landy. This guy is hard to find decent photos of online, but I found one at least. I think he's there with Eddie Van Halen and Les Paul at some event. Templeman and Don Landy recorded the band in sessions at Sunset Sound in Los Angeles beginning in late August 1977. They had to spend extra time with David Lee Roth to do extra takes, double takes, retakes of certain vocal tracks on different songs, just to ensure that Roth was in key all the time and in time. The band, all the performances for the most part, there were some punched in guitar solos later, but most of that album was recorded live. The incredible song "Show Your Love," "Little Dreamer," those were both cut live. Eddie Van Halen, of course, ushered in what was known as the Brown sound, and he got that sound from a rudimentary pedal board that he had created. One of the main components of that pedal board, of course, it was an original pedal called the MXR Phase 90. It had a script logo on it, and back in 2019, Van Halen was featured in an exhibit at the Metropolitan of Modern Art in New York, and there was just some incredible stuff on display. Unfortunately, I wanted to go. I didn't make it to New York during that time period. I'm not sure how long it ran, but there are incredible photos of Eddie's original Frankenstein guitar, as well as kind of the amp setup, as well as his pedal board and the head units and the amps, the Marshall stacks, just incredible. The Echoplex phase units were housed in an old World War II bomb enclosure, so very very cool. Now, when we talk about this album, this thing shot out of the gate in it was released in February 1978, and it's one of those iconic kind of generation shift records. Other things would come to mind, like maybe the Beatles' first one or two albums that were released in the United States, the Ramones, the Sex Pistols, but Van Halen. This had a similar effect on the rock and roll landscape as, I would say, Led Zeppelin's debut album back in 1968. It was that important, it was that heavy, and that iconic. There's that dumb iconic word again, but hard not to escape using that word with this album. Now, I have two pressings of the album. I have a later 1978 repress. This thing still sounds amazing. The cover photos were taken at the Whiskey A Go Go, and we've got David Lee Roth on the back. There's that late 1978 Warner Brothers label, and this sounds still today absolutely incredible. If you can find a clean copy of the original or later presses from 1978, even 1979, you're going to be very, very pleased. Great soundstage, incredible separation of the instruments, plenty of drive and punch. The 1-2 from Eruption into You Really Got Me is one of the best transitions that you will ever hear on a rock and roll record. Still amazing to this day, and these are easy to find out there for the most part, but it is getting tough to find clean copies. My other pressing is the famous 2015 reissue remastering with Chris Bellman. There are still copies of this in print. Even I think at the Walmart pressings, maybe still being they may still be using the Chris Bellman cuts. I am not 100% sure. I don't own any of those pressings, but if you have the easy to identify CB for Chris Bellman in the Dead Wax, and you're going to be incredibly pleased. This is my copy. Of course, those now have barcodes on the back. And let's bring the record out. Nice and flat, beautiful pressing, 180 gram. They've replicated that original Burbank Palm Tree Warner Brothers label. Again, make sure if you have one of the Bellman cuts that you do have the CB and the Dead Wax. I think that makes a huge difference. If you don't have the CB and the Dead Wax, we don't know the provenance of the mastering. This is an incredible sounding reissue, one of the best reissues I've ever heard. Compared to the original, I think it edges the original out. It's just got an incredibly wide soundstage, and I can say I have never heard this album as great as with this Bellman pressing. A lot of people also point to, I believe it's a 2009 DCC pressing, mastered by Steve Hoffman and Kevin Gray. People will swear by that, but a lot of people are in the opinion that the best ever sounding pressing is the Chris Bellman cut. So Thankfully, I think it's widely available out there in the marketplace. I still see, if I go into a Barnes and Noble, I still see the Van Halen reissues. I think they're available on Amazon. I know local record stores here in my town are stocking Van Halen as well. So if you can get those Chris Bellman cuts, they are exemplary. So that's it. What about the legacy of Van Halen? What about those upcoming MoFi one steps? Before the whole MoFi debacle, I had a pre-order in place for um, everything. I think everything, including 1984, which is one of my favorite Van Halen albums. But I decided to cancel those for my own reasons. I just am not a fan of the way that whole episode was handled by MoFi. I don't want to get into it again, although I am getting into it again. But I canceled those things. I don't think they're going to be $125 or $150 better than the Bellman cut, which can be had for about $25. So that's my take on the Van Halen MoFis that are still yet to, this was announced over a year ago now, I think, and we haven't seen one of those yet. As far as the legacy of Van Halen, of course, they went on and worked with David Lee Roth all the way up through 1984's 1984 album, hooked up with Sammy Hagar. It's funny, in researching this debut album, Don Landy and Templeman, they were kind of concerned about David Lee Roth, if he was the right fit for this music in that band. And Templeman had a relationship with Sammy Hagar, and on more than one occasion, they were getting ready to call Sammy Hagar, and David Lee Roth, pulled it off somehow in the studio with them, and it turned out that David Lee Roth was the right choice for this original run of Van Halen. Who knows what would have happened if he would have stayed with the band, post 1984. Of course, there was the famous reunion in 2006, 2007, and then we got the final Van Halen album in 2012, and I saw the reunion tour. They did two or three different runs. I know they did a large run in 2007, and of course they toured behind A Different Kind of Truth. They did another run, I believe, in 2015. So those were the last live dates that we have with Eddie Van Halen. Unfortunately, they did that Tokyo Dome live album, and upon further hearing of that, some of those songs, the big knock on David Lee Roth is, and David Lee Roth was never a fantastic live singer, but he is one of the best frontmen in rock and roll history. But a lot of people complain about his later live situation. Interestingly enough, he has been re-recording with kind of the current backup band that he's had over the last couple of years. He re-recorded several Van Halen songs, and they sound fantastic. Now, they're not quite the same without Eddie Van Halen on guitar, but David Lee Roth is being fairly true to the original compositions, the original song structures, the original keys, and he's actually, surprisingly sounding quite good. Which brings me to my final point. When are we going to have some kind of a tribute concert, or maybe a small run of shows in tribute to Eddie Van Halen? Based on what we saw at the Taylor Hawkins shows, there's no reason why Wolfgang Van Halen can't handle the guitar duties for these so-called concerts. And I think that it would be interesting to have David Lee Roth and Sammy Hagar, both eras, represented in some kind of a tribute to Eddie Van Halen, with Michael Anthony back on bass guitar as well. Michael Anthony, such an unsung hero in those early Van Halen records. His high harmonies are and were a force to be reckoned with. The proof is in the pudding. When you hear those records and those harmony vocals, that was basically Michael Anthony. In some cases, I think they double tracked Michael Anthony's backup vocals, but also with Eddie as well. But that is a not too unknown secret about the incredible sound of those early Van Halen records, is Michael Anthony's vocal harmonies. Anyway, Van Halen camp. I think Al is in charge of things right now. And there were all these rumors that they were going to bring in Joe Satriani, and they had spoken to Michael Anthony. They had spoken to Jason Newsted, formerly of Metallica. Nothing ever amounted to anything. So I think it would be pretty cool if we did see a few shows. But in Van Halen land, miscommunication and dysfunction is basically the normal situation there. That's why we've never seen the remastered reissues from the Van Hagar years. So I don't know if those will ever be coming or not. I am firmly in the David Lee Roth camp as far as which singer do I like the most. They were two different eras, I understand that, but I prefer the first iteration of Van Halen. Anyway, that is today's Best in Class, taking a look at the super incredible debut album from Van Halen that was released in February of 1978. A must-have for any collection. Take care, everybody. I'll be back soon with something new.